talk about inverse functions. So suppose I give you this function example. Let y be 2x plus 1, and I ask you to find the inverse. Okay, very good. So what are the steps? To find the inverse of y equals to f of x. Step 1, let's follow the steps. Step 1, switch x and y. X and y. Okay, what's the meaning of that? It means that wherever you see y, just write x. Wherever you see x, just write y. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to use a different color. I'm going to write down x, and I'm going to write down y, just switching between x and y. So x is equal to 2y plus 1. I switched x and y. This is your very first step. Step 2, isolate your y. Okay, isolate my y. I need my y to stay on one side alone. So what are you going to do? You're going to subtract 1 from both sides. So let us write it down. Subtract 1. Okay, so I get x minus 1 equals to 2 times y. Is y isolated? No. 2 is multiplied by y. I have to get rid of 2. What's the meaning of that? I have to divide both sides by 2. Divide both sides by 2. Divide by 2. Okay. So what do I get? I get x minus 1 divided by 2 equals to y. Last step, step 3. Use inverse of f of x for y. So wherever I see y, I'm going to use inverse function. This is the inverse. This is the inverse function. Inverse function. Very good. So what do I have? I have inverse of f equals to x minus 1 divided by 2. This is your final answer. Okay, let us go over more examples. Let us make it more interesting. So you have the following. Suppose y is equal to, let's write down square root of x. So I have square root function. I have square root function, and I want to know how to find the inverse of square root. So follow the steps. Step 1, switch x and y. So this guy becomes x, this guy becomes y. So you have x equals to square root of y. This is my first step. Step 2, isolate your y. But y is inside the radical. To get rid of the radical, raise both sides to the second power. To isolate y, we need to raise both sides to the second power. We have to get rid of this radical. The only thing can cancel out the radical, the square root, is raising to the second power. So what happens here? You get raised to the second equals to raised to the second. So you get x to the second equals to square root of y to the second. Remember that square root and exponent 2, they cancel out each other. These two gets canceled out. Exponent and the square root, they cancel out each other. What's left? You get x squared equals to y. This is my step 1. This is my step 2. My y is isolated on one side. Last step, use inverse function notation for y. So I get inverse of f equals to x squared. This is our answer. We expected that. The inverse of square root function is quadratic function. These functions, if you graph them, are mirror image of each other with respect to the line y equals to x. Okay, let's make it more interesting. Very well. So now I give you a rational function. Example. Find the inverse of your y is equal to, for example, 2x divided by x minus 1. Ooh, it is cool. It has a lot of variables. I have a rational function. Remember that the domain of this function is all x values such that x is not 1. The zeros on the denominator are not acceptable. Okay. What's the step 1? Step 1, switch x and y. So x becomes 2y over y minus 1. Step 1 is not that hard, just switching between x and y. Step 2, isolate your y. Okay, be careful here. We're going to follow a lot of steps. To isolate y, multiply y minus 1 and x on the left. Okay, what do I mean by that? I'm just doing the cross multiplication, right? I say, hey, the denominator not given, so it is an invisible denominator 1. I'm multiplying x and y minus 1. So I get x times y minus 1 equals to 2y. Okay. Distribute x into parentheses. Distribute x. So what do I get? I get x times y minus x. On the right hand side, I have 2y. Guys, remember that your goal is to isolate y. Bring xy to the other side. Subtract xy from both sides. My goal is to have all y's on one side. So I get minus x equals to 2y minus xy. Well, see, I have all y values on one side. Factor out y. There we go. I have minus x equals to y, parentheses 2 minus x. Now just divide by 2 minus x. Divide by 2 minus x. What do I get? I get minus x divided by 2 minus x equals to y. Now the final step. My y is isolated on one side. I'm happy about it. Step 3. use inverse function notation for y, and you have negative x over 2 minus x, or you can simplify this more, x divided by x minus 2. I distributed this negative sign on my denominator. I have negative x divided by, so inverse of f is negative x over 2 minus x. I can write it as x divided by this negative sign can be written on the denominator, minus 2 minus x, or x divided by negative 2 plus x, or x over x minus 2. This is my inverse function. Okay, very good. So another example for you. Suppose we have y equals to the third root of 2x plus 1. Guys, note that the index for my radical is 3. Just a quick recall that. You have, for example, x to the first power, x to the second power, x to the third power, x to the fourth power, and so on. You can also raise x to radical exponent as well. For example, x raised to a half, x raised to a third, why not? X raised to a fourth, and so on. For simplicity, they use square root of x. They use the third root of x. They use the fourth root of x, and so on. So when we write the third root of something, it means that we took that quantity, whatever it was, and we raised it to a third. So first, step 1, flip x and y. So x becomes the third root of 2y plus 1. Now to isolate y, you have to get rid of this third root. Raise both sides. This is our step 2. Let me write down this step. To isolate y, raise both sides to the third power. So what do we get? Parentheses to the third, parentheses to the third. On the left-hand side, you have your x to the third, equal to, then you're going to copy down the third root of 2y plus 1. Again, the third root is a quantity raised to a third. So the third root and the exponent 3, they get canceled out. You get x cubed equals to 2y plus 1. Now to isolate y, get rid of the constant negative 1. Subtract 1. Okay, if I subtract 1, I get x cubed minus 1 equals to 2y. Now to get rid of 2, divide by 2. Okay, so let's see. We have x cubed minus 1 divided by 2 equals to y, and it's the last step because y is isolated on one side. The inverse of f is x cubed minus 1 divided by 2.